Welcome to this explainer. Look, I want you to imagine, just for a second, standing right in the middle of a vast, sprawling desert, completely surrounded by countless grains of sand. That is exactly how vast the teachings, the actions, and the sayings, collectively known as the Sunnah of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, truly are. Now, for centuries, the absolute biggest challenge for classical Islamic scholars wasn't just, collecting these thousands of sayings. No, it was meticulously and rigorously authenticating them to build this rock-solid foundation of Islamic law. So today, we're going to take a really fascinating journey into exactly how they pulled off that monumental task.
All right, here's our roadmap for today. We're kicking things off with as soon as authority. Then we'll move down through three distinct levels of certainty: mutawatir, mashhur, and khabar wahid. After that, we're going to weigh fiqh against memory. And finally, harmonize the whole thing with Islamic law. Let's get right into it.
Section 1. The Sunnah's authority. Following the Prophet, peace be upon him.
Okay, let's dive into this. Before we even think about categorizing anything, it's absolutely vital to understand that following the Sunnah is just as compulsory as following the Quran. As the Quran itself explicitly states, whoever obeys the messenger has obeyed Allah. But here's the catch, right? While the Quran is preserved perfectly as a single compiled book, the primary challenge with the Sunnah was dealing with a slight gap in transmission certainty. Scholars literally had to mathematically and logically prove, without a single shadow of a doubt, that a hadith links directly back to the Prophet. And that crucial necessity? Well, that's what gave birth to our funnel of certainty.
Section 2. Mutawatir. Absolute certainty.
So this represents the very widest part right at the top of our funnel. Let's define this really clearly. Mutawatir is a hadith that has been narrated in every single generation by such a massively large and reliable group of people from entirely different places that it is logically and humanly impossible for all of them to have somehow conspired to invent a lie. Its certainty is absolute. No joke, rejecting a mutawatir narration knowingly is actually considered kufr, or disbelief, because you aren't just doubting a person, you're flat out doubting an undeniable historical reality.
To really grasp the sheer weight of this, let's use the sunrise analogy. Imagine if thousands of people in your city wake up, see the sunrise, and independently report it to you. You wouldn't doubt them, right? No sane person would. You wouldn't need to cross-examine every single individual because the collective agreement is just overwhelming. Well, mutawatir works the exact same way. Mass transmission entirely removes any shadow of a doubt.
So what does this actually look like in everyday practice? Well, the foundational everyday practices of Islam actually reaches through this undeniable method. The exact number of rak'ah you pray, 2 for Fajr, 3 for Maghrib, 4 for Isha, the specific threshold amounts for zakat, and actually the entire transmission of the Quran itself. Every single one of these are mutawatir. They are the mass-transmitted bedrock of the faith.
Section 3. Mashhur. Famous narrations.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is the fascinating evolution of a mashhur hadith. The word literally means famous. It's a narration that started out in the first generation with maybe only 1 or 2 narrators, meaning, there was a very slight initial lack of mass transmission, but then it rapidly became widespread, totally famous, and universally accepted by the Ummah in the second and third generations.
Watch how this builds across generations. Think of it kind of like a single brilliant teacher. Let's say just 1 or 2 of the Prophet's companions in that very first generation, teaching a specific rule to their students. Then in the second generation, those students go on to teach thousands more across all these different cities. By the time we hit the third generation, the idea has spread like wildfire. It has widespread, undeniable acceptance across the entire Islamic world. It blossoms over time into this mass knowledge, effectively bridging that gap to almost absolute certainty.
Some excellent practical examples of this are the permissibility of masa, which is wiping over leather socks during wudu, and the specific punishment of stoning for a married adulterer. Now listen, there is absolute consensus among classical scholars that it is compulsory to act upon mashhur narrations. Because it gained such deep, mass acceptance so early on in Islamic history, rejecting it is literally considered bid'ah, which means an unacceptable religious innovation.
Section 4. Khabar wahid. Solitary narrations.
All right, this brings us to the narrowest part of our funnel, and I need to clarify a huge misconception right off the bat here. Solitary absolutely does not mean weak, not at all. A khabar wahid is simply a narration reported by one individual from another, or maybe a few from a few. It just means the sheer numbers of narrators in each generation don't quite reach that massive, undeniable scale of a mashhur or mutawatir hadith.
But despite that, these solitary narrations can still be incredibly authentic, and they actually form the backbone of a massive, crucial part of Islamic legal rulings.
Now, because there are fewer narrators to rely on for cross-referencing, the vetting process for these solitary reports is, frankly, intensely rigorous. For a khabar wahid to be accepted into law, every single narrator in the chain must pass some seriously strict conditions. They've got to be Muslim, demonstrably pious in their daily lives, unfailingly truthful, possess a proven strong memory, and be of sound intellect. If even one single link in the chain fails this test, the hadith isn't used for core legal rulings. It's an absolutely amazing peer review system from over 1,000 years ago.
Section 5. Fiqh and the narrators.
This right here is really the intellectual climax of our explainer. Early scholars recognized this profound, beautiful nuance among the Prophet's companions. Look, while all the companions were universally truthful, reliable, and deeply respected, they definitely had different natural strengths. Some of them, like Abu Bakr, Omar, Ibn Masud, and Ibn Abbas, they were absolute legal geniuses, true masters of fiqh and deep legal deduction. But others, like Abu Huraira and Anas bin Malik, were master memorizers who dedicated their entire lives to preserving as many exact words of the Prophet as humanly possible. And this intellectual distinction, it completely changes how their solitary narrations are applied when things get, a bit complicated.
So, the crucial point is this. What happens when a solitary narration contradicts standard logic? Well, if a legal master from the companions narrated something that seemed to contradict simple legal analogy, what we call qiyas, the scholars humbly preferred the hadith over human analogy. Why? Well, because these were fiqh masters. If they narrated a ruling that defied standard logic, it meant they were imparting a specific, divine exception they learned directly from the Prophet. Like, standard logic might not dictate that laughing loudly in salah breaks your wudu, but because strong fiqh narrators reported it, the hadith is strongly preferred over analogy. The same exact thing goes for the ruling that vomiting a mouthful breaks wudu.
Conversely, let's look at the master memorizers. If their solitary narration contradicted a very strong legal analogy, classical scholars sometimes actually preferred the analogy. A super famous example of this is a solitary narration stating that wudu is required simply after eating food touched by fire, so cooked food. But Ibn Abbas, who as we know was a master of fiqh, theologically refuted the literal, ongoing application of this by asking a brilliant question. He basically said, will your wudu be complete if you perform it with hot water heated by fire? Boom. He demonstrated this fascinating preference for qiyas, showing that touching fire alone doesn't logically break purification. It's just an incredible scholarly method of balancing textual memory with deep legal context.
Section 6. Sunnah and Islamic law. Harmonizing the faith. The Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, provided the ultimate standard for this harmony. He's reported to have said that if you learn of a hadith, compare it to the Quran, accept what concurs and reject what contradicts. Now, the really beautiful reality here is that an authentically proven sunnah never truly opposes the Quran, right? Because both are revelations from Allah. Instead, under the careful, highly trained eye of qualified scholars, these ahadith intricately explain, specify, and just perfectly detail the Quranic principles.
And this brilliantly illustrates our entire journey today. If we just quickly summarize our funnel, right up at the top is mutawatir. Massive numbers, absolute certainty, like knowing the number of rak'ats in salah. Then we hit that middle tier, mashhur. Started small but became historically widespread, carrying a very strong certainty like the rules for wiping on leather socks. And finally, khabar wahid at the bottom. Solitary narrations that don't reach massive numbers, but through intense, rigorous vetting are highly probable and widely accepted for crucial fiqh rulings when proven authentic.
So I want to leave you with this final, profound thought. If the preservation of just a single solitary saying required such immense, rigorous logic, strict multi-generational vetting, and brilliant intellectual mastery by classical scholars, well, how deeply should we value the sunnah in our everyday lives today? The sheer human effort and divine blessing required to protect this knowledge is absolutely breathtaking. I really hope this explainer has sparked a profound respect for the scholastic rigor of Islamic law within you and leaves you curious to keep learning and digging deeper. Thank you so much for joining me today, and hey, stay focused on your learning journey.